When I milk the cow on Uncle Earl's farm, I use the ulna bone that is in my arm. Moo-ya! Oh, sorry. Sometimes I get carried away with that song. It's one of my favorite songs. This is part 2 of Chapter 7, Holes, Anatomy, Physiology. We're talking about bones. So previously we talked a lot about structure. Now we're going to talk about development and then various diseases and so on. So first we start. Osteogenesis is the formation of new bone, and ossification is the hardening of that bone. So in embryos, of course, we have to form the bony skeleton. We'll talk about how that occurs. And then bone growth into early adulthood. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then followed by remodeling or thickening of the bone and also repairing it. We'll get there as well. So first, 2 types of ossification. Excuse me. Intramembranous ossification is basically sheets laid down one after the other. This is for flat bones, and this is also for bone repair often. You get connective tissue laid down, and then you ossify those sheet-like connective tissues. That's intramembranous ossification. Endochondral ossification is when you have a long bone, or most of the bones of the skeleton, in fact, but you add some cartilage, and then you convert that cartilage to bone. You ossify it, and then you add some more cartilage, and then you convert that cartilage to bone. So it's creating a model or scaffolding for what the bone's going to look like, and then converting it into bone. And that's also with connective tissue, specifically cartilage, hyaline cartilage. So when you are a fetus, when you're an embryo, bones start to form. In fact, at 8 weeks you can see bones, even though they're not actually bones yet. They're made of hyaline cartilage, and then they're going to get covered by osteoblasts. And you might remember osteoblasts are the cells that will form osteocytes. The osteocytes will then fill in and take the place of, or fill in for the cartilage that will be converted into that bone, except where the cartilage is in the joints, the articular cartilage, and also in the epiphyseal plates. That doesn't ossify until later, somewhere late teens, early 20s. Now, apositional growth, so when you think of bone growth, you think of elongating the bone, but there's also widening or thickening the diameter of the bone. This is called apositional growth. Now, how long your bones are going to be depends, of course, on genetics, and tied to that is the amount of growth hormone, HGH, that you release during puberty. The more you release, the more you grow, and you all know that you grow the most during puberty. That's your growth spurt, the major growth spurt. And the growth occurs at the epiphyseal plate. The point at which the diaphysis and the epiphysis meet is where the growth occurs. And we'll talk later about what can happen if a break occurs there as well. And this can happen anywhere from age 16 to 25. Going up to 25 is pretty rare, pretty unusual for the epiphyseal plate to ossify then and to continue growing until 25. But it does happen. So here we have long bone growth versus remodeling. And this is a sort of an unnecessarily complicated picture. It's hard to see really what's going on, but let me just break it down here for you. First of all, cartilage forms, and then the cartilage is replaced by the bone, and that occurs on the end. This is for long bone growth. Now keep in mind that it grows here on the outside of the bone and also on the inside in the medullary cavity. You also get growth as well during for this long bone. Again, first cartilage, and then it gets ossified into bone. Remodeling, on the other hand, it still occurs in both areas, but you reabsorb bone from one area where there's more or where it's less necessary, and then you add bone by apositional growth to the area of need to thicken that specific area, and then that process kind of continues. So that's what we call remodeling. It's just apositional growth. So you're going to maintain the normal proportions and strength, and what causes this apositional growth? Well, calcium levels in the blood. So if you don't have enough calcium in the blood, you're going to pull it off your bone. This is a storage area for calcium for you. And then also, the more you work out and the more you walk and use your bones and put a force on your bones through muscles and pulling on them and so on, the more bone remodeling will occur to strengthen those bones, which is a good thing. This is partially why they tell people as they get older to do weight-resistant exercises to work their muscles, because especially in women, older women who are predisposed for osteoporosis, this can help to strengthen their bones. More on osteoporosis later. Calcium is super important. Why would we take it off the bone? That seems illogical. Well, it's important for a lot of other things, that are necessary immediately, where in bone it's a little bit less necessary at that moment. So we needed to transmit nerve impulses, specifically in the synapse from one nerve to the other or to the muscle. Calcium is needed to release the neurotransmitter, and we'll talk about that at a later unit when we do nervous system. It's important for muscle contraction. We'll talk later about that as well, but it's released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Important for blood coagulation or blood clotting. It's also necessary for secretion by glands and nerve cells, and then also cell division, where it acts as a second messenger to trigger other reactions to occur inside the cell. If you don't know what second messenger is, don't worry too much about it. What affects bone growth, repair, and also development? Well, first of all, you need plenty of vitamin A. So if you don't have enough vitamin A, you're going to retard your bone development or slow it down, of course. If you don't have enough vitamin C, which is unusual nowadays because we eat lots of fruit, but in Columbus's day, for example, you could get fragile bones with a deficiency in vitamin C. Vitamin D is the more well-known one. In kids, it's called rickets. In adults, it's called osteomalacia, which is, we'll talk about on the next slide, but it's weakened bones. If you don't have enough human growth hormone, then you can get dwarfism. You're too short, of course. Too much, and you get gigantism or acromegaly. You see these people like Andre the Giant growing severely, severely tall and just never stop growing. That's acromegaly. They also say that Lincoln suffered from this excess growth hormone. He showed some of the characteristic signs, if you didn't know that. Insufficient thyroid hormone, it delays bone growth. It slows down because thyroid hormone controls or plays a big role in metabolism. Sex hormones promote bone formation and also causes ossification of the epiphyseal plates. Now, think about a football player in high school who's, let's say, 15 and he takes steroids. He's going to trigger or cause the ossification of his growth plates, and he's not going to grow anymore. Where maybe he was supposed to grow another 6 inches, he's now going to be locked up and fused, and he'll be a solid 5'2" and super big and stocky, and still not playing in the NFL. And then physical stress, as we talked about before with old folks, lifting weights and so on, it stimulates bone growth, especially apositional growth is what we're talking about there. So here's rickets. This is characteristic bowed legs of rickets, where over time the bones are so weak as you put force or pressure on them, the bone starts to bend or curl like that, causes bone legs. This can also happen in the skull and the rib cage and so on. And this is either caused by not enough calcium in the diet, because calcium is important for vitamin D absorption, or the other way around, and also just vitamin D deficiency. So let's say you don't take enough milk, which is vitamin D fortified, and you're not in the sun enough, well then you can get rickets or osteomalacia. Because of the various countries or places where it's very cold over winter and people don't go in the sun, that's actually why they originally fortified milk, which is very high in calcium, and calcium helps to absorb the vitamin D. That's why they put vitamin D in milk. You don't really need it in your milk because you're in the sun enough. It's plenty warm in San Diego, of course. Osteoporosis, another characteristic bone disease that you've probably heard of, where bone resorption, so pulling calcium off the bone, outpaces bone deposition. This mostly affects the spongy bone. Here you can see normal spongy bone, and one that is osteoporotic, where it looks like these giant Swiss cheese holes. It just creates weakness in the bones. Very typical of postmenopausal women who don't secrete and produce enough androgens or sex hormones like estrogen anymore, and as a result their bones become fragile. They break them very easily. Many of you may know an aunt or a grandmother who broke a hip just from falling, or someone who broke a rib from sneezing because they have osteoporosis. The best way to avoid osteoporosis, and it can affect both sexes but mostly women, the best way to avoid it is to start very young, right now in your teens, maintaining high calcium levels. Not too high because that causes other problems, but maintaining high calcium levels all throughout because it's a buildup over a lifetime. Let's talk about breaks or bone fractures. They're classified in a variety of ways. So how the bone finishes, so where the bones are in relationship to each other. Is the bone just partially or completely broken all the way? The orientation of the bone to its axis, so is it twisted or straight up and down, that kind of thing. And then does the bone break through the skin or not? I know, gross, right? So you could have a compound fracture where the bone ends penetrate the skin. Okay, this is also called open, and you see the bone sticking out. I hope you never see the bone sticking out. A closed fracture, or simple, is they don't penetrate the skin. Comminuted is it breaks into multiple pieces. Often for this you might need surgery to input pins to hold those bones together. And then spiral is a twisting type of break, which is more common in sports type injuries, where the bone actually twists and breaks. So here you see comminuted. That's pretty obvious. Here's the x-ray that you can see. It's typical of people where bones are very brittle, maybe someone with osteoporosis. Compression fracture, one we didn't just mention, but in the vertebrae where the vertebrae compress on each other and they squeeze and break, such as due to a fall, typically. Spiral fracture, that twisting where you twist your leg, someone forces it. Here's an epiphyseal fracture. We didn't talk about it before, but obviously you can identify what that is. A depression fracture in the skull will show you. It's pretty obvious. Compression fracture where we already just showed you where the bone is crushed, and then a green stick fracture, which is incomplete, kind of like a bending. It's common in children who have more cartilage compared to adults than bone. So here you see a depression fracture in the skull, cracking your skull if you like. Here's your green stick fracture, just a little partial break in that bone as it bends out. This is again in children who don't have full ossification having occurred yet. What do you do when you break a bone? Well, you get it reduced. Sounds weird. Closed reduction is when you realign it, stick it back in place, you cast it. Open reduction is when you stick pins and wires in, and you often have these pins and wires sometimes on the outside of your skin after surgery, and then you cast it. Usually 3 months or so, 2 to 3 months will get you all healed, and then you'll be ready to go home or ready to go do whatever it is you want to do. I hope you weren't out of your house for 6 to 8 weeks. How does the bone heal? You form a hematoma, which just means a bleed, essentially, in the area of break due to a hemorrhage. Hemorrhage is the bleeding portion. Hematoma is the clot. And this mass of clotted blood forms at that site. It can be swollen, it can be painful. Then that hematoma starts to fill with fibrocartilage, and we get a soft callus. You can think of it kind of like a callus on your skin. It's connective tissue, and it's fairly soft and a little bit pliable, so you can still kind of break it apart and mess with it. So you got to be really careful when it's in its cast, of course, and not take it out of the cast too early. And then capillaries start to grow into it to bring it really good blood supply, and you get some phagocytic cells from the immune system cleaning out excess debris and loose stuff and all that good thing. And then you finally get the bony callus. The fibrocartilage gets converted and ossified into actual bone. And then you start some apositional growth and bone remodeling on the sides to kind of clean things up and finish it as you see here, so that it's nice and pretty. And then you have the compact bone laid down on kind of around the sides and so on. And on that note, we have finished part 2 of